بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه الطيبين الطاهرين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين.
We start with the name of Allah and we praise Him for the endowments that He bestowed upon us. And we ask Allah to raise the rank of our Prophet Muhammad and his believing relatives and companions.
إن شاء الله نكمل في فرائض الوضوء ما بدأناه أمس، لكن أجد أن الحضور بعضهم يمكن يتأخر في النوم فيتأخر في الاستيقاظ فيتأخر عن الدرس فيفوته ما نقرأه قبل استكمال الحضور. لكن مع هذا يعني ينبغي أن نلتزم بالوقت مراعاة لمن حضر في الوقت.
Inshallah, we will continue with the integrals of wudu from where we left off yesterday. But we noticed that the attendance right now is a little bit weak, and that could be due to people sleeping late, and as a result waking up late, and as a result coming to the lesson late. And so despite that, we will continue inshallah, so that we can at least take care, especially for those who have put the effort to be here on time.
من حضر في الوقت أولى بمراعاته ممن تأخر.
The one who attends in a timely manner, this person is more worthy of being taken care of regarding this than those who come later.
بارك الله فيكم. يقول المؤلف رحمه الله: السادس من فرائض الوضوء الدلك، وفيه ثلاثة أقوال: المشهور الوجوب، والثاني القول الثاني نفي الوجوب، والقول الثالث أنه واجب لا لنفسه بل لتحقق إيصال الماء. معناه الدلك معناه أن ليس فقط يصب الماء على يده ويجعل الماء يجري من غير أن يمر عضوه ويساعد في وصول الماء إلى بقية الجسد، بل عليه أن يدلك. ليس الدلك يعني المساج، لا، إنما المساعدة في إيصال الماء بالاستعانة باليد إلى سائر العضو. هذا معناه من غير ضغط. والدلك يمكن أن يكون مع صب الماء ويمكن أن يكون عقب صب الماء، ليس شرطا أن يكون مع صب الماء.
The author, may Allah have mercy upon him, said the sixth, that is to rub. And there are three sayings concerning this. The famous saying is that it is an obligatory, or it is an obligation. And the second saying negates its obligation. And the third saying is that it is obligatory not in and of itself, but for the certitude in delivering the water. And what is meant by rubbing here is that it is not sufficient to merely pour the water on the limb that needs to be washed. Rather, one needs to make sure that he uses his hand, for example, to help the water in reaching the different parts of his organ, of his limb. So it is not, and what is intended here is not to massage or to apply a great amount of pressure. Rather, what is meant is to use the hand, for example, to make the water reach the parts of the limb that needs to be washed. And this rubbing of the limb, it is not a condition that it would have to be simultaneous with the washing. It can be done with the washing, and it can also be done after the water is poured on the limb that needs to be washed.
المشهور الوجوب لنفسه، يعني ولو كان تحقق أن الماء وصل، لكن مع هذا يجب الدلك.
And the famous saying is that this is an obligation in itself, even if the person was certain that the water did reach the parts of the limb that needs to be washed, or the body part that needs to be washed. It is an obligation in itself to make sure that one rubs.
والثاني الذي هو نفي الوجوب مطلقا، لا يجب.
And the second saying is that it is not an obligation.
والثالث واجب فقط من أجل التحقق من وصول الماء، فإن تحقق وصول الماء بغيره سقط وجوب دلكه. كيف يتحقق من وصول الماء؟ يقولون كأن أدخل يده في الماء وأطالها مثلا وفرق الأصابع، أما مع ضم الأصابع قد لا يصل الماء لما بين الأصابع، مع تفريق الأصابع وإدخالها في الماء وإطالتها في الماء، ليس غمس وإخراج بسرعة، هذا يكفي. قالوا إذن لا يجب الدلك، تحقق وصول الماء.
And the third saying is that it is not an obligation in of itself. However, it is obligatory for the certitude in delivering the water. And according to this, if a person is certain that that the water has reached all of the parts of this body part that needs to be washed, of this limb that needs to be washed, then he would not need to rub this limb for wudu. And how would one be certain that the water reached all of the parts of the limb that needs to be washed? An example of that is if he were to immerse his hand and forearm, for example, into water. He kept it in the water with his fingers spread out for an extended period of time. And then he took it out of the water. By this, he would be certain that the water reached all of the parts of the limb that needs to be washed. Therefore, he would not need to rub. However, if he were to have done this without spreading his fingers, rather his fingers were closed, then the water would not reach the areas that are between the fingers.
السابع، الفرض السابع من فرائض الوضوء والأخير الفور، ويعبر عنه بالموالاة، أي مع الذكر والقدرة. مع الذكر والقدرة يعني دون العجز والنسيان. مع الذكر يعني دون النسيان، مع القدرة يعني دون العجز.
The author said the seventh is immediacy, and it is expressed using the term succession. That is, while remembering and able. While remembering and able, that means that he was not forgetful, not in the case of the one who is forgetful, who forgot, nor in the case of the one who was unable to.
نعم، والفور معناه أن يفعل الوضوء كله في فور واحد، في وقت واحد من غير تفريق. أما التفريق اليسير مغتفر، يقولون التفريق اليسير مغتفر لا يؤثر، لكن إن فرق تفريقا طويلا يؤثر، يكون ترك واجبا من واجبات الوضوء.
And what is meant by immediacy is to ensure that one made the wudu in a specific interval of time, meaning without him making gaps between the integrals of the wudu, without making gaps between the integrals of the wudu. However, a slight gap, a slight interval of time between the integrals of the wudu, this is excused.
طيب، قلنا هذا الموالاة واجبة مع الذكر والقدرة، فإن ترك الموالاة عجزا، يعني أحضر ماء، هيأ ماء يكفيه لوضوئه، ثم أثناء الوضوء قبل غسل رجليه مثلا انكب الماء، فهو يحتاج أن يجلب ماء جديدا ليكمل به وضوءه. إن كان فرق وضوءه عجزا كهذا المثال، أكمل وضوءه ما لم يطل الفصل. أحضر ماء ليتوضأ به. لا نتكلم عن هذه الأيام أو هذه البلاد التي الماء فيها سهل من الحنفية، هذا لا يعجز عن استكمال وضوئه في فور واحد. لكن الشرع ما جاء فقط لهذه البلاد أو للناس الذين سهل عليهم الماء. بعض البلاد وبعض الناس يكون إحضار الماء عليهم صعبا، فنتكلم عن أولئك. إذا كان بعض الناس يمشون مسافة ليجلبوا الماء ليتوضأوا به، يحملوه على رؤوسهم أو يحملوه بأيديهم مسافة طويلة. على هذا المثال، إن أحضر ماء يكفيه لوضوئه، بدأ بالوضوء، غسل وجهه ويديه ومسح رأسه، فانكب الماء بدون إرادته، انكب الماء، يحتاج أن يحصل ماء جديدا ليكمل وضوءه. إن لم يطل الفصل فاستطاع تحصيل الماء يكمل وضوءه ولا يحتاج أن يعيد من الأول. إن طال الفصل بين الجزء الأول من وضوئه والجزء الثاني يبتدئ وضوءه من أوله.
So we said that the succession in wudu is obligatory, is an integral, when one is able and remembering. What does it mean for one to be able? We said in the case of the one who is unable to, then this would not be the case. Meaning the one who is unable, the situation of the one who is unable is the example of the one who acquired water and he started making wudu. He washed his face, he washed his hands and forearms, he wiped his head, and before he washed his feet, the water spilled by accident. And so he would need to acquire more water in order to continue the wudu. In this case, if the gap between the first part of the wudu and the second part of the wudu with the new water was not a long period of time, then it would be sufficient for him to continue from where he left off. However, if the period of time, if the interval of time was extended, then he would need to start from the beginning. And it is important to note that the rules of the religion, they apply to people of this country as well as other places as well. And so although in this country it is easy for us to acquire water, usually there's a faucet and a sink, and it is something that is facilitated for us, there are places where the people need to walk a long distance in order to acquire the water and bring it to their homes.
طيب، قلنا ما لم يطل الفصل. ما معنى يطل الفصل؟ معناه أن تجف الأعضاء المعتدلة في الزمان المعتدل. أن تجف الأعضاء المعتدلة في الزمان المعتدل. لما يقولون الأعضاء المعتدلة؟ لأنه الجلد مختلف أيضا. بعض الناس يكون أعضاؤهم رطبة فالماء القليل يكفيهم للوضوء، وبعضهم تكون جافة، لا يحتاجون ماء أكثر. ولا يعتبر لا الذي عضوه رطب، جلده رطب، تطول مدة الجفاف فيه، ولا الذي جلده جاف يقصر مدة الجفاف فيه. الأعضاء المعتدلة في الزمان المعتدل. كذلك في الشتاء الجفاف يطول، في الصيف يقصر، يصير الجفاف بسرعة. نعم.
And what is meant by the extended period of time or a long gap that would break the succession? A long gap that would break the succession is the gap that if one were to have waited, then the water on the body parts that were washed would dry, considering the moderate time as well as the moderate body parts. Meaning some people, their body parts or their limbs are of a moist nature, and as a result they do not require a lot of water when washing. And there are others whose body parts or limbs are dry in nature, and so they require more water. So what is considered here regarding the limbs and the body parts is that which is of a moderate nature. And likewise, the time is moderate, meaning considering the weather, such as in the winter,
تجف بوقت أطول من الصيف.
in the winter, it takes a longer amount of time for the body parts to dry than in the summer.
نعم. ماذا؟ نعم، هو هكذا إن وصل إلى غسل رجليه مثلا وانكب ماؤه أهريق ماؤه، إن بحث على الماء وكانت الأعضاء التي غسلها قبلا، لا اليدين هو الأخيرة، ولو كان جف ما قبله لكن الأخيرة إن لم تجف بعد في الزمان المعتدل والأعضاء المعتدلة، حتى يقولون والبلاد المعتدلة، لأن البلاد أيضا مختلفة. يعني في بغداد مثلا في الصيف يمكن ولو كان يتوضأ بشكل عادي ولا لا يصل إلى غسل رجليه إلا وقد جف وجهه إن كان في الفلات. هذا لا يعتبر المكان المعتدل والزمان المعتدل والأعضاء المعتدلة.
And just answering the question that was asked regarding the example that was given about the person who was making wudu, and then before they washed their feet, the water spilled, and so they needed to acquire more water in order to continue the wudu. We said that in this case, if there's a long period of time that lapses, then in this case he would need to start the wudu again from the beginning instead of continuing from where he left off. And what is considered here is where the part of the body that he washed last, which was the hands and forearms. So if the hands and forearms become dry before he starts to wash the feet after acquiring new water, then he would need to restart the wudu from the beginning, and this is considering average or moderate time, as well as moderate areas, such as excluding, for example, an area like Baghdad where the weather there or the climate there is not a moderate climate. As a result, if a person were to make wudu in the open space of Baghdad, for example, he would often find himself that before he reaches the next body part to wash, the first one already became dry. So this is not considered in this case a long gap of time or a period of time, because this is not moderate climate.
طيب، قلنا أنه إن ما استطاع أن يتوضأ في وقت واحد عن عجزا يكمل ما لم يطل الفصل. إن طال الفصل يعيد الوضوء من أوله. يكمل ما لم يطل الفصل معناه بدون تجديد نية جديدة، نيته الأولى التي بدأ بها كفته. عندما يجد الماء مع قصر الفصل وأراد أن يكمل لا يحتاج أن يجدد النية.
We said that the person, if he was unable to be successive in his wudu due to an excuse like the example that we mentioned, and the period of time that lapsed was not an extended period of time, it was not a long period of time, then he continues from where he left off and he would not have to restart the wudu. When he continues from where he left off, for example, washing the feet, then he does not need in this point to renew the intention. He would not be required to renew the intention when continuing.
لأن نيته ما زالت موجودة. هو لما فقد ماءه الذي يكمل به يبحث عن الماء. لماذا؟ ليكمل وضوءه. إذن النية ما زالت موجودة. لأجل هذا لا يحتاج تجديدا.
And this is because the intention is still remaining in his heart. Why? Because when he lost that first quantity of water that he had with him, when it spilled, and he went to look for more water, then his intention of doing so was in order to perform wudu. So his intention is still present in his heart.
الحالة الثانية التي ذكرها قال مع الذكر والقدرة، قلنا دون العجز والنسيان. فإن فرق وضوءه نسيانا، يعني لم يمسح رأسه، نسي أن يمسح رأسه مثلا، غسل يديه وجهه ويديه، نسي أن يمسح رأسه فغسل رجليه. هنا متى ما تذكر يستكمل وضوءه ولو طال الفصل، ولو لم يتذكر إلا بعد 10 ساعات يمسح رأسه ويكفيه ولا يحتاج أن يعيد الوضوء. فإن فرق نسيانا بنى ما فعل وأكمل على ما فعل وأكمل من غير تجديد، لكن يحتاج تجديد نية. لماذا؟ لأنه لما نسي معناه نيته ذهبت، ما عاد له نية وضوء، فيحتاج لهذا العضو الذي تركه نية جديدة. لا يعيد. نعم، لا يفعل المتروك فقط.
As far as the one who is, we said that it is immediacy is one of the integrals, while remembering and while able. We spoke about ability and not being able. As for the one speaking about remembering, so if a person, for example, made wudu and he forgot to wipe his head and he washed his feet, and he did not remember until a period of time lapsed, even if it was a long period of time lapsed, even if it were 10 hours that lapsed, then he remembered that he forgot to wipe his head. What does he do in this case? It is enough for him to just wipe his head, and he would not need to restart the wudu from the beginning. However, in this case, he would need to make the intention when he wipes the part that he forgot to wipe originally, because the fact that he forgot means that the intention is no longer or was no longer present in his heart. So when he goes back to wipe the part that he forgot to wipe, then he would need to renew the intention.
إذن إن فرق وضوءه مع العجز يستكمل وضوءه إن قصر الفصل فقط. أما إن فرق وضوء بدون نية، أما إن فرق وضوءه نسيانا يستكمل متى ما ذكر، طال الفصل أو قصر لكن بنية.
Therefore, the one who makes a gap between the integrals of wudu, if this was due or washing or wiping the body parts that need to be washed or wiped, if this, we said in regards to the one who was unable to, due to the example we mentioned, for example, if a person was unable to, then in this case, if the period of time was not a long period of time, then it is enough for him to continue from where he left off without needing to renew the intention. In regards to the one who forgot, then in this case, when he remembers, it is enough for him to wipe or to do the part that he forgot to do, and he would need an intention in this case, whether, and this is regarding, meaning he is able to go back and do the part that he forgot, whether the period of time that lapsed is a short period of time or a long period of time, and we said that he would need the intention.
طيب، هل عليه إن كان نسي مسح الرأس وتذكر بعد ساعة يمسح رأسه، هل عليه أن يفعل ما بعد مسح الرأس؟ لا يجب، لأن الترتيب عندهم ليس واجبا كما هو في المذهب الشافعي. رأيتم أنه ما مر معنا الترتيب.
If a person forgot to wipe his head in al-wudu, and like in the example we gave, that he did everything, he washed the feet and he forgot to wipe his head. After an hour he remembered and he wipes his head. Would he need to do what is after wiping the head in this case? The answer is no, because the doing it in order is not an integral according to the Malikis.
الترتيب عندهم سنة.
Rather, doing it in order is something that is recommended.
ولو بدأ برجليه ثم وجهه ثم يديه ثم مسح رأسه صح عندهم، لكن خلاف السنة.
Even if he started with his feet, then his face, then his hands, then he wiped his head, this would be valid according to them. However, he would have missed out on the sunnah.
لكن هذا الناسي قلنا يفعل المتروك فقط، لكن إن تذكر عن قرب يقولون يسن له أن يفعل ما بعد المنسي أيضا، سنة وليس واجبا. أما إن تذكر بعد طول فصل لا يجب ولا يسن إلا المتروك.
In regards to the one who forgot, they mention that the one who forgot, if he remembers without a long time period of time lapsing, then he does the part that he missed, and it is recommended for him to do what is after that as well. However, if the period of time becomes long, extended, then in this case, it is enough for him to do the part that he forgot, and that is what is obligatory, and it would not be recommended nor obligatory to do what is after that.
لاحظتم الفرق؟ عند الشافعي الترتيب واجب والموالاة سنة، عندهم الموالاة واجبة والترتيب سنة.
And you can see the difference. According to Ash-Shafi'i, the succession is recommended and the order is an integral, is an obligation. However, according to the Maliki school, the succession is an obligation and doing it in order is recommended.
قال المؤلف رحمه الله: فصل نواقض الوضوء على قسمين، أحداث وأسباب.
The author, may Allah have mercy upon him, said, section, the invalidators of wudu are of two categories: ritual impurities and causes.
فالحدث ما ينقض بنفسه وهو ما خرج من السبيلين من المعتاد دون غيره.
And the ritual impurity is that which invalidates the wudu in itself. That is what is emitted from the eliminatory outlets among what is customary, not what is unusual.
ما هو المعتاد؟ يقول: وهو البول والغائط والريح. الريح المراد به الخارج من الدبر وليس الخارج من القبل. الخارج من القبل لا ينقض الوضوء عندهم. هذا يحصل مع بعض النساء، هذا لا ينقض الوضوء.
And what are examples of things that are customary, such as urine, feces, gas? And what is meant by the gas here is that which exits from the anus, not that which exits from the front private part. Some people, some women for example, they would have a condition where the gas is emitted from the front private part. This does not invalidate al-wudu.
والمزي والودي والمني في بعض صوره.
The author said, and the pre-ejaculate, the wadi, this will be explained, discharge, and in some circumstances, the ejaculation.
عندكم تفسير للمزي والودي؟ الودي شيء سائل سخين أبيض غليظ، يعني ليس رقيقا، يخرج بإثر البول. وذكرته.
The wadi, here it's mentioned the wadi. The wadi is a viscous white fluid that exits after the urine at times.
يجب منه ما يجب من البول.
It is obligatory to do what is obligatory when it comes to urine.
قال: والمني في بعض صوره. المني عندهم في بعض صوره يجب منه الوضوء، وفي بعض صوره يجب منه الغسل. ليس دائما يجب منه الغسل عندهم.
And the author said the ejaculated fluid in certain circumstances. In certain circumstances, according to the Malikis, it is an obligation to perform wudu as a result of the exiting of the ejaculated fluid. And in other cases, it would be an obligation to perform ghusl as a result of the exiting of the ejaculated fluid.
يجب منه الغسل إن خرج مقارنا للذة المعتادة.
It would be an obligation, or it would make ghusl obligatory if it was emitted accompanied with a feeling of desire, of customary desire, lust.
أما إن خرج بغير لذة أصلا أو بلذة غير معتادة لا يجب منه الغسل بل يجب منه الوضوء فقط.
However, if it exited without any feeling of pleasure or desire, or with uncustomary desire or pleasure, then the ghusl would not be an obligation, rather one would be obligated to perform wudu.
يقولون كمن حمل شيئا ثقيلا فخرج منه المني، وهذا قد يحصل مع بعض الناس، أو لدغته عقرب من شدة الألم والشد على نفسه خرج منه البول، خرج منه المني من غير لذة معتادة. هذا يقولون هذا يجب منه الوضوء فقط لا يجب منه الغسل.
An example of this is if a person were to carry something very heavy. Sometimes if a person carries something very heavy, the ejaculated fluid would be emitted from him and it would be without any pleasure or desire. Then one would not be obligated to perform ghusl in this case, rather it would suffice for him to make wudu. Or another example is if a person was stung by a scorpion, for example. And so because of the immensity of that and him pushing on himself due to the pain and the like, the ejaculated fluid was emitted without the customary desire and pleasure, then in this case, he would not be obligated to perform ghusl, rather he is obligated to make wudu.
لأجل هذا يذكرونه في نواقض الوضوء أيضا، لأنه في بعض الصور لا يجب منه الغسل، فإن لم يجب منه الغسل وجب منه الوضوء.
And this is why they mention the ejaculated fluid as one of the invalidators of wudu, the emission of the ejaculated fluid as one of the invalidators of wudu, because in certain circumstances, the emission of the ejaculated fluid does make wudu obligatory. In the cases that the ejaculated fluid does not make the ghusl obligatory, then the wudu would be obligatory.
طيب، يقول الناقض الحدث هو ما خرج من السبيلين من المعتاد. يقول أما غير المعتاد كسلس البول والمذي والحصى والدود فلا وضوء فيه واجب. السلس معناه الخارج المعتاد إذا خرج على غير العادة. البول معتاد إذا خرج على العادة، أما إذا كان يتقطر دائما يخرج دائما، إذا خرج المعتاد على غير العادة صار سلسا. كذلك دم الحيض معتاد، إذا خرج تعدى مدة الحيض وصار دائما يخرج، إذا خرج هذا المعتاد على غير العادة صار سلسا.
Then the author said that which is customary, we mentioned that amongst the matters that invalidate wudu in themselves is that which exits from the eliminatory outlets, which is customary and not unusual. As for what is unusual, it is like the incontinence of urine, pre-ejaculate, stones and worms. Thus no wudu is obligatory due to that. Incontinence here refers to that which originally customarily would be emitted, such as urine. Urine originally is something customary that one would emit from his private part. However, if it starts to exit in an uncustomary, unusual way, then such as the one who the urine continuously drips from his exit, continuously exits from the exit, then in this case it is now considered incontinence of urine and it would not be customary. And likewise, another example of something that would be uncustomary in this context is originally that which is customary, such as the menses that exits from the woman. However, if it passes the duration, the known duration of the menses, and it passes that amount of time, and it continues to exit, then this would be an incontinence of that exited material. And so this would now be something uncustomary in this context.
وسلس المزي كذلك والحصى. الحصى أيضا ليس شيئا معتادا خروجه، والمراد بالحصى ما تولد في البدن وليس ما ابتلعه الشخص ثم خرج منه. الحصى التي تتولد بالبدن خروجها ليس شيئا معتادا، فإذن لا ينقض الوضوء. قالوا ولو خرجت ببلة، يعني خرجت مبلولة، لا تنقض الوضوء أيضا، لأن الذي ينقض الوضوء هو خروج المعتاد، وهذه ليست من المعتاد.
And likewise, the incontinence of the pre-ejaculate, this is another case of something that is unusual or uncustomary. And the stones, and what is meant by the stones here is that which forms in the body. We are not referring to a stone that someone swallowed and then it exited out of him. Rather, the stones that would be formed within his body and then they are emitted. If one has an incontinence.
لا الحصى ليس لا دخل له بالسلس. السلس موضوع السلس انتهى بالمزي.
And in this case, by the mere exiting of this stone, the person would not be obligated to perform wudu, even if it exited with some moisture.
لكن معنى قولهم ولو خرجت مبلولة معناه بلل فقط. أما إن خرج معها بول أو خرج معها غائط فالنقض الوضوء يكون بالبول الذي خرج وبالغائط الذي خرج، ليس بها نفسها. أما البلل الذي عليها إن لم يخرج معها بول ولا غائط لا تنقض الوضوء، لا ينقض الوضوء.
When we say if it exits with some moisture, this does not include if it exited with urine. Because if it exits with urine, then the wudu would be invalidated not as a result of the exiting of the stone, but due to the exiting of the urine itself. Or if he were to defecate while the stone was emitted from him, then his wudu would be invalidated not because of the emission of this stone, but as a result of the exiting of the feces.
بخلاف الحصى التي ابتلعها، إن ابتلع حصى ثم خرجت منه، هذه خروجها معتاد. عادة الناس إن ابتلعوا شيئا غليظا كالحصى العادة أن يخرجوه، فهذا خروج معتاد، لأجل هذا ينقض الوضوء.
And what we mentioned regarding the stone is because the exiting of the stone is something that is unusual, as opposed to the case of the one who consumes a stone. He swallows a stone and that it exits out of him. This stone exiting out of him in this case is customary because he swallowed it, and it is customary that one would exit or emit out of him what he swallowed. So this would be customary in this case, and this would invalidate wudu.
والدود قال الدود كذلك إن خرج من الدبر لا ينقض الوضوء لأنه ليس شيئا معتادا.
And likewise the worm, if it exits from the anus, this would not invalidate wudu because this is not customary.
نرجع لموضوع السلس. المستحاضة، الامرأة المستحاضة الذي يأتيها الدم كثيرا خارجا عن العادة، عن عادة الحيض، مع تفصيل يأتي في الحيض إن شاء الله نذكره في مكانه، لا ينقض الوضوء. السلس بشكل عام، سلس البول أو سلس الدم أو سلس المذي أو سلس الريح، أحيانا مع بعض الناس يكثر منهم خروج الريح دائما دائما دائما، هذا إن وصل إلى حد السلس معناه لا ينقض الوضوء لأنه لم يعد معتادا. لكن السلس متى لا ينقض الوضوء؟ بقيود، بشروط. يقولون لا ينقض الوضوء إن كان إتيانه مثل عدمه أو أكثر. إن كان يأخذ نصف الوقت فأكثر، أما إن كان يأخذ أقل من نصف الوقت ينقض.
And we mentioned regarding the subject of incontinence, this could pertain to incontinence of urine, the incontinence of the pre-ejaculate, the incontinence of passing gas. There are those who the gas is emitted from them in a very regular manner, so they would have an incontinence in this matter, or even the incontinence in bleeding, such as a woman who is mustahaba, who has sickness bleeding, her bleeding continues past the limit of the menses with details, then in this case she would be in the state of having incontinence. And those who are incontinent in these matters, we said that their wudu is not invalidated. However, this is with restrictions, with certain restrictions. And that restriction or that condition is if the occurrence of this incontinent matter is more than its absence, meaning it occurs half of the time or more than half of the time. However, if it occurs less than that, then it would still invalidate the wudu.
يعني إن كان المستحاضة مثلا أو الذي عنده سلس البول إن كان يأخذ عليه نصف النهار تقديرا، ليس معناه أنه عليه أن يحسب ساعة بساعة ودائما ينظر تقطر لم يتقطر، والامرأة دائما تنظر خرج الدم لم يخرج الدم. تقديرا إن كان يقدر أنه يأخذ عليه نصف الوقت فأكثر، نصف النهار فأكثر، يقول إذن هذا سلس لا ينقض الوضوء. وهذا يسهل كثيرا على لا سيما على النساء عندما يكون عندهن استحاضة. الاستحاضة داخلة في السلس لأنها خروج المعتاد، الدم المعتاد، لكن على غير العادة. هو هذا تعريف السلس.
And so in the case of incontinence, and included in that is the woman who has sickness bleeding, the mustahaba, this is also included in the subject of the incontinence. Incontinence here again refers to the matter that is originally something customary, however it exits in an uncustomary manner. This is what the incontinence refers to. Therefore, if a person were to estimate, for the duration of the day, he estimates that the urine was exiting out of him for half or more of the day. He estimates. It's not a condition that the person would have to calculate very specifically the amount of time, but he estimates that more than half of the day the urine was exiting, dribbling out of him. Or the woman who is mustahada, who has sickness bleeding, she estimates that the blood was exiting from her more than half of the duration of the day, for half of the duration of the day or more. Then this person would judge themselves as having incontinence of such material, and this would not invalidate their wudu. And this makes it easy upon the woman, especially the woman who have the sickness bleeding, who are afflicted with this matter.
إذا كان يحدث كل وقت صلاة، كم من الوقت يأخذ من كل وقت صلاة؟ لا، إن كان لا يأخذ نصف الوقت من النهار لا يعتبر سلسا. بالنهار مع خلاف عندهم هل يخصم منه الوقت الذي ليس فيه صلاة أم لا. يعني من الشروق إلى دخول الظهر هذا ليس فيه وقت صلاة، هذا يحسم. وبعضهم قال لا يحسم، يعتبر كل النهار. خلاف في ذلك.
Regarding the amount of time that one would calculate, some of them, there's a difference of opinion. Some of them said the time when calculating this duration. The time in which there is no prayer due then would not be included in calculating. For example, the time between the sunrise and the dhuhr, this duration of time, there is no obligatory prayer due. So one would not include this in the calculation of the duration of the day according to this saying. However, others said, within the school, said that it is all calculated from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, even the time that does not have a due obligatory prayer.
بقي شيء واحد نقوله في السلس، وهو أنه السلس لا ينقض الوضوء إذا كان سلسا لا يستطاع التداوي منه. أما إذا كان يمكن التداوي منه فعلى الإنسان أن يسعى ليتداوى منه، لكن وقت التداوي لا يكون لحظة، يأخذ وقتا. زمن التداوي يبقى معذورا، يعني يبقى لا ينقض له الوضوء. قد يأخذ التداوي شهرا، وقد يأخذ شهرين، وقد يكون سلسا لا يمكن التداوي منه.
There's one more thing that remains regarding the case of the one who has incontinence. We said that the incontinence would not invalidate the wudu, and this is also with another condition, that this incontinence is something that one is not able to be treated from. However, if one is able to be treated from this incontinence, then he needs to strive to treat this incontinence. And it is understood that the duration of time for the course of the treatment to be completed is not usually a moment of time. Rather, it takes a certain amount of time. It might take 1 month or 2 months or more. During this time, he is also excused, so he would also, in this period of time, the incontinence would not invalidate the wudu.
أنهينا الأحداث. الآن الأسباب. أليس قال نواقض الوضوء أحداث وأسباب؟ السبب ما كان مؤديا إلى خروج الحدث كالنوم الثقيل.
We completed speaking about the ritual impurities. We said that the wudu is invalidated by ritual impurities and by causes, أسباب.
نعم.
إذا كان يستطيع التداوي بالنسبة للسلس.
نعم.
إذا كان يستطيع التداوي منه.
نعم. إذا كان يستطيع التداوي منه فلم يفعل لا يكون معذورا. نعم. أما إن علم أنه يمكن التداوي منه وبدأ يسعى بالتداوي منه يكون معذورا طول هذه المدة، وقد يتعافى وقد لا يتعافى. طالما هو يظن أنه يمكن التداوي منه ويسعى بذلك يبقى معذورا، لا يكون معذورا يعني ينقض الوضوء كالشافعي.
This is a question regarding what was mentioned about the incontinence. If the person was able to be treated from the incontinence and he does not strive to obtain this treatment, then this person would not be excused. Meaning, in this case, the incontinence would invalidate the wudu. And so, if he strives to get the treatment, then in this case, we said that he's excused for the duration of the treatment as well. And it might be the case that he doesn't get cured from the incontinence. And going back to what we mentioned about the invalidators of wudu, we said there are the ritual impurities and there are the reasons or the causes, what is known as the asbab. And the cause is that which results in the occurrence of ritual impurity, like the heavy sleep.
النوم الثقيل لما قالوا عنه سبب وليس حدث؟ لأنه هو نفسه ليس حدثا، ليس خروج ريح، ليس خروج بول، إنما قد يؤدي النوم إلى خروج الريح من غير أن يتنبه مثلا. لأجل هذا قالوا هو سبب للحدث وليس هو حدثا بذاته.
Why did they mention that the heavy sleep is a cause for what would result in the occurrence of ritual impurity? Because the heavy sleep itself is not a ritual impurity. It is not the exiting of urine or the feces or the like, or the gas or the like. Rather, it is something that results in the occurrence of the ritual impurity.
النوم الثقيل قالوا. إذن لما قالوا النوم الثقيل إذن النوم الخفيف لا ينقض الوضوء.
Therefore, the light sleep does not invalidate wudu.
كيف يعرف النوم الخفيف من النوم الثقيل؟
How would one be able to differentiate between heavy sleep and light sleep?
قالوا علامة النوم الثقيل أن يكلم من قرب مثلا فلا يتنبه. أما لو كان خفيفا ولو كان نائما، يعني ليس فقط أغمض عينيه إنما أغفى، لكن كان نوما خفيفا، فإن اقترب شخص منه وكلمه يستيقظ. هذا نوم خفيف.
They said the indication of the heavy sleep is that if a person were to speak to the sleeping one from a close proximity, then they would not wake up as a result. Then this is a heavy sleep. However, regarding the one who is sleeping a light sleep, who is actually sleeping a light sleep, not merely the one who is closing his eyes, but the one who is sleeping a light sleep, if someone were to speak to him from a close proximity, he would wake up. This is known as the light sleep.
أو تسقط السبحة من يده، كان يحمل السبحة ويذكر الله فأغفى، فإن سقطت السبحة من يده يستيقظ. هذا نوم خفيف. أما إن سقطت السبحة من يده ولم يستيقظ علامة النوم الثقيل.
Or for example, he was carrying the prayer beads, the subha, in his hand, and he fell asleep. If these beads, they fall from his hand and he wakes up as a result, then this is an indication that this was light sleep. However, if those beads, they fall from his hand and he does not wake up as a result, then this is an indication of heavy sleep.
أو قالوا تنفك حبوته، انفكت حبوته فاستيقظ، علامة النوم الخفيف. إن انفكت حبوته فسقط على الأرض ولم يستيقظ علامة النوم الثقيل. كيف بدنا نمثل الحبوة؟ الاحتباء أن يجلس على مقعدته ويرفع ساقيه عن الأرض، ينصب ساقيه ويحتبي بيديه، يربط ساقيه بيديه. أحيانا يكون الإنسان لا يوجد ما يسند إليه ظهره، ماذا يفعل؟ يرفع ساقيه ويمسك ساقيه بيديه كأنه مستند. فإن كان محتبيا بيديه فأغفى، لما يغفى ترتخي أعصابه، تنفك حبوته فيسقط. إن حصل ذلك ولم يستيقظ هذا علامة الثقيل، أما إن استيقظ علامة الخفيف.
Another example is if someone was sitting in a specific position where his buttocks are planted on the ground and he raises his knees towards him and he puts his hands around his knees. In this way, sometimes when a person does not have something to lean his back against, he would sit in this manner and he fell asleep. And usually when the person falls asleep, his muscles become relaxed and the like. So if when his hand, this form that he was sitting in became undone, and as a result he fell, if he does not wake up as a result of this occurrence, then this is an indication that he is in heavy sleep.
إذن النوم الثقيل ينقض الوضوء، النوم الخفيف لا ينقض الوضوء، طال أو قصر، ولو كان طويلا هذا النوم الخفيف، ولو كان طويلا لا ينقض الوضوء، لكن يستحب الوضوء من الطويل الخفيف. خفيف لكنه إن طال يستحب منه الوضوء ولا يجب.
And so we mentioned that the heavy sleep is that which invalidates the wudu. As for the light sleep, it does not invalidate wudu, whether this light sleep was for a short period of time or a long period of time. Rather, it is recommended for one to make wudu if one has a long, light sleep.
ولمس الأجنبية التي تشتهى إن قصد اللذة أو وجدها. الأجنبية التي تشتهى يعني ليست الصغيرة جدا وليست الكبيرة جدا. لمسها لا نتكلم عن الحرمة، نتكلم عن نقض الوضوء. إن لمسها إن قصد اللذة سواء وجد اللذة أو لم يجد انتقض وضوءه، أو وجد اللذة ولو لم يقصدها انتقض وضوءه، لأن الإنسان قد لا يقصد لذة، فإن حصل اللمس يجد لذة وهو لم يقصد في الأصل انتقض وضوءه، أو أحيانا يقصد لذة لكنه لما يلمس لا يجد لذة كذلك انتقض وضوءه. متى لا ينتقض الوضوء باللمس؟ إن لم يقصد اللذة ولم يجد اللذة لا ينتقض الوضوء.
The author, may Allah have mercy upon him, said, in skin contact with the marriageable woman or contact with the marriageable woman of a desirable state, if he sought pleasure or felt it. If he sought pleasure or felt it. What this means is that and what is excluded from the marriageable woman of desirable state, this excludes the very young girl and as well as the very old woman. So if he touches a marriageable woman of a state of desirability, seeking the pleasure, whether or not he feels it, then this would invalidate the wudu. Likewise, if he touches her and as a result he felt the pleasure, whether or not he sought to feel the pleasure, this also invalidates the wudu. So when would this not invalidate the wudu? In the case when this happens without seeking the pleasure and without feeling the pleasure.
ويدخل في النقض بالوضوء باللمس الشعر والظفر والسن، مع أنه عند الشافعي لا ينقض إلا لمس البشرة، عندهم يدخل كل ذلك.
And here when we are speaking about touching the marriageable woman, what is meant here is touching the skin, and this also includes touching the hair as well as touching the nails and touching the teeth. As for according to Ash-Shafi'i, touching the hair and touching the tooth and the like does not invalidate the wudu.
وقبلة الأجنبية التي تشتهى ينص الفقهاء على القبلة لأنهم عند اللمس يشترطون وجود اللذة أو قصدها، أما هنا لا يشترطون لأنه يقولون لا بد من وجود اللذة في القبلة.
They said, and kissing the marriageable woman who reached a desirable state. And here in this case they mention this as a separate matter as opposed to the touching, because the touching, we said that if this is done seeking the pleasure or feeling the pleasure, if one sought pleasure or he felt pleasure, then the wudu would be invalidated, or else it would not be invalidated. If he did not feel the pleasure and he did not seek the pleasure, then his wudu would not be invalidated. Kissing was mentioned as a separate matter because he will feel pleasure as a result, so it is considered an invalidator of the wudu.
نعم. لا، إذا لمس زوجته مع حائل، الزوجة لا تختلف عن غيرها من سائر النساء. الزوجة لا تختلف عن غيرها من سائر النساء. إن قصد اللذة أو وجدها انتقض الوضوء، هي كسائر النساء الأجنبيات. لكن نعم، أولا أبين هذا أنها هي كحكمها كحكم غيرها. أما موضوع الحائل فقد قال الفقهاء المالكية إن كان الحائل رقيقا إن قصد اللذة أو وجدها مع الحائل الرقيق انتقض الوضوء، أما إن كان غليظا فلا.
There's a brother who asks about if a person touches the his wife with a barrier and he felt pleasure, what is the judgment? And so the answer to that is that the wife, she is like any other woman in this regards, in this context. She is like any other woman. So if he touches her seeking the desire or feeling desire, then his wudu would be invalidated. However, when it comes to the barrier, there is a detail here. If there is a light barrier and he touches her over this light barrier, and he did so feeling the desire or seeking the desire, then the wudu would be invalidated. And if it was a thick barrier, then if he feels the desire and or seeks the desire, then this would not invalidate the wudu.
نعم. القصد يكون للمباشر، أما المباشر ليس له قصد، المباشر له الوجود فقط.
And there is a question about if this pertains to the one who is touching, doing the actual touching, versus the one who is being touched. The one who is touching, regarding the intention of seeking or seeking the desire, this applies to the one who is touching. As for the one who is being touched, then
الملموس لا يقصد شيئا، هو ليس هو الذي لمسه إنما لمس، فهو ليس له قصد، بقي له الوجود.
As for the one who is being touched, he is not the one who is touching himself or herself. So this person did not have the intention or the desire to touch or to seek that. Rather, all they are is existing. So
نعم، لأنه إن لم يجد، ونقول هو ليس له قصد، ما قصد شيئا، لأنه هو ليس هو الذي باشر اللمس.
And so the one who is being touched, if they do not feel pleasure, then their wudu is not invalidated.
قال والإغماء والجنون وإلطاف المرأة، وقيل لا ينقض الوضوء. الإغماء أيضا ينقض الوضوء، والجنون غيبوبة العقل تنقض الوضوء، وإلطاف المرأة يعني أن تدخل، الإلطاف معناه أن تدخل يدها بين شفري فرجها، يعني بين حافتي فرجها، ليس اللمس من خارج فقط، أما اللمس من خارج لا ينقض.
The other causes are fainting, insanity, and inserting the hand into the labia minora. So what is meant here is if the woman, for example, places her hand between the labia minora of her private part, then this is what invalidates the wudu. As for touching from above that would not invalidate the wudu.
وقيل لا ينقض مطلقا، لمس المرأة لفرجها لا ينقض مطلقا، ألطفت أو لم تلطف، قالوا لأنها لمست جزءا من جسدها، ولمس جسد الشخص نفسه لا ينقض الوضوء.
And others said that this does not invalidate the wudu. Rather, she merely placed her hand on her private part, or she placed it between the labia minora of her private part. This would not invalidate the wudu because she is touching her own private part, which is a part of her body, and the person touching their own private part does not invalidate the wudu.
لأجل هذا لا يوجد هنا لمس الدبر. لمس الدبر عندهم لا ينقض الوضوء من الرجل أو المرأة، لأنه لمس بدن نفسه، ولمس بدن الشخص نفسه لا ينقض الوضوء عندهم، باستثناء لمس الذكر، لأن لمس الذكر ورد فيه الحديث، فقالوا الرسول استثنى هذا فنحن نستثني هذا فقط، ورد في الحديث من مس ذكره فليتوضأ، فقالوا إذن مس الذكر فقد ينقض الوضوء، مس باقي الجسد كالمرأة تمس فرجها أو دبرها والرجل يمس دبره لا ينقض الوضوء. قالوا ما استثناه الرسول فقط نستثنيه.
As for touching, we said touching the private part, touching the anus, for example, this does not invalidate the wudu because this is the person touching their own anus, their own body or their own private part, does not invalidate the wudu. because it's from their body. However, what is excused or what is an exception of this case is the man touching his own penis. This invalidates the wudu due to the hadith that was mentioned. Since the Prophet made an exception in the hadith, they said we also make this exception, and it is the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Man massa dhakarahu falyatawadda," which means whoever touches his penis, then let him make wudu.
مس الذكر الذي ينقض الوضوء هو المس بباطن الكف أو بباطن الأصابع أو بجنبها أو بجنب الكف. هذا الذي ينقض فقط، ليس فقط ما ينطبق عند إطباق الكفين، هذا الباطن. بقي الجنب، عندهم المس بالجنب أيضا ينقض.
And so what invalidates
أما بالظاهر لا ينقض.
What invalidates the wudu is to touch the penis with the inner part of one's hands or the inner part of his palms or his fingers, as well as the edges of the fingers, the sides of the fingers. It is not only what is covered when one puts his two hands together, but what is also added to that are the edges or the sides of the fingers. This is also included. If one were to touch his penis with this part of his hand, then this would also invalidate the wudu.
المس بالظاهر مس الساعد هذا كله لا ينقض الوضوء.
As for touching with the back of one's hand, or for example with his forearm or the like, this does not
ساعد.
With the forearm, this does not invalidate the wudu.
ولم يقيسوا عليه كما قاس الشافعية. الشافعية تقاس على على الذكر الفرج المرأة، وقاسوا الدبر. هم ما قاسوا، قالوا على ما قال الرسول فقط نلتزم به ونقول هذا الذي ينقض فقط.
The Malikis do not do like what the Shafi'is said. The Shafi'is, they deduced based on the judgment of touching, the man touching his own penis, likewise the touching of the anus, as well as the touching of the vagina, the person's own vagina. As for the Malikis, they did not deduce this. Rather, they said what the Prophet made an exception, which is touching the person's own penis. This is what is an exception. This is what breaks the wudu.
سبحان الله والحمد لله رب العالمين وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. بارك الله فيك. نعم. لكن بقي عنده سؤال أولا.
I can't hear you. Kissing? هل هناك تفصيل بالنسبة للقبلة؟
بالنسبة للقبلة بعض المالكية يفرق، يقولون إن كانت على الفم أبطلت مطلقا، أما إن كانت على غير الفم لا تبطل إلا مع وجود اللذة أو قصدها كذلك، وبعضهم لا يفرق.
Some regarding the kissing, the brother is asking if there's a difference, if there's any details. Some of the Malikis, they said that if the kissing was done on the lips, then this would invalidate the wudu without any, invalidate the wudu absolutely, without any restriction. And as for kissing other parts of the body, other than the lips, then this would invalidate the wudu if one sought desire or felt the desire. And others, they said, like what we mentioned, that kissing would invalidate the wudu absolutely.
لا من نفسه. نعم نعم. مس الذكر من نفسه، يقولون الذي يعمل الحجامة مثلا للأطفال هذا لا ينتقض وضوءه مثلا. إن لم تجد اللذة ولم تقصد اللذة لا ينتقض وضوءها. نعم.
Touching the private part or the penis of the man, that breaks the wudu. This is regarding if the man or the person touches his own penis. If the man touches his own penis. As for if, for example, someone else touched the penis, then this goes back to if one sought the desire or felt the desire. This would be what invalidates the wudu.
كالذين يعملون ليس الحجامة الختان للأطفال.
For example, an example of this is the one who does the circumcision for the young child. This person would not seek the desire nor feel it, so this does not invalidate the wudu.
نعم. لا، ليس له دخل لا العصب ولا الحشي، إنما هذا العصب والحشي من أجل التلوث بالنجاسة، لكن خروجه ذات خروجه ولو خرج لا ينقض الوضوء إن كان سلسا. وكذلك الامرأة خروج الدم منها لا ينقض لها وضوءها إن كان مستحاضة بحيث أخذ عليها نصف الوقت فأكثر. نعم نعم لا ينقض الوضوء. لا. آمين.
The brother asked about the judgment of, is it required that the person would have to do certain things, the one who has incontinence, if they would have to, for example, tie something or to use a piece of cloth or the like to prevent the filth from spreading or the like. Does this have anything to do with the judgment of the wudu being invalidated or not? Regarding the one who is incontinent, with the details that we mentioned, that the incontinence is for the duration of half the day or more, as well as the other conditions that were mentioned along, then this person's wudu is not invalidated whether or not they take these measures or not. Rather, these measures are taken in order to prevent the najas filth from spreading.
مضى ربع ساعة من وقت استراحتكم من أجلكم. أنا جالس على الكرسي، أنتم تتعبون بالجلوس على الأرض. نعم. عليكم السلام. شو يعني بعض جملك واضحة وبعضها ليس مسموعا. كيف تضبط ما هو على المذهب الشافعي وما هو على المذهب المالكي؟ إن أردت الوضوء فلا تخلط نصف الوضوء على المذهب الشافعي ونصفه على المذهب المالكي، إما تتوضأ على المذهب الشافعي وضوءا كاملا أو على المذهب المالكي وضوءا كاملا. لا تمزج بينهما في وضوء واحد. يمكنك أن تتوضأ مرة على الشافعي ومرة على المالكي، لكن ليس في وضوء واحد تخلط بينهما.
Regarding just being precise about making wudu and not mixing between the two schools, when making wudu, one should not mix between making wudu according to the Shafi'i school or making wudu according to the Maliki school. Rather, if one wants to make wudu, he makes a complete wudu according to the Shafi'i school, or he makes a complete wudu according to the Maliki school. Or if he wants, he can make wudu according to the Shafi'i school, and then another time he would make wudu according to the Maliki school. However, he does not mix between the two in the same wudu.
لا، المعانقة إن لم يكن معانقة الرجل للامرأة، يعني عانق زوجته أو عانقته، إن لم تقصد اللذة ولم تجد اللذة ولا هو، لا ينقض الوضوء. حتى ولو كان فوق ثوب، ولو قصدوا اللذة ووجدوها لكن فوق ثوب غليظ لا ينقض الوضوء، إلا كما ذكرنا إن كان مع ثوب رقيق وبشرط قصد اللذة أو وجودها.
There's a question about if hugging without desire, does this invalidate the wudu? If a man were to hug his wife or the wife hugs her husband, for example, this does not invalidate the wudu. And even if they felt desire or they sought the desire, we said if this was done with a thick barrier, then this does not invalidate the wudu, whether or not they felt the desire or they sought the desire. However, if it was done over a light barrier, then if they felt the desire or sought the desire, then this would invalidate the wudu, according to what we mentioned previously.
نعم. ما سمعت. نعم. نعم، من توضأ وأتى بجميع السنن يكون وافق كل المذاهب.
If one makes wudu and he performs all of the recommended matters of wudu, then he would have performed wudu in a way that is valid according to all the schools.
نعم. نعم.
There was a question, can one make wudu according to the Shafi'i school and then pray according to the Maliki school? The answer is yes.
نعم. 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 نعم.
If a person was not able to be successive in his wudu due to an inability, and there was a long period of time that lapsed, then he would restart the wudu as we mentioned. When he restarts the wudu, he would need a new intention.
لأن هذا وضوء مستقل جديد ليس إكمالا.
Because this is a new wudu and this is not the continuation of the first wudu.
ما شاء الله. لا تريدون الاستراحة بين الحصة والحصة؟
Would you like a break between the classes?
نعم. نعم. نتكلم فيه إن شاء الله.
Inshallah, we'll continue in the next class. نهدد.